For 2015, Acura has decided to give the American market a 2-for-1 sale, and they've canceled both the TSX and the Acura TL, giving us instead one brand new model called, logically, the TLX. Now, because the TLX is either a front-wheel drive or an all-wheel drive luxury sedan, this competes with the likes of the Audi A3, the Audi A4, Volvo S60, Lincoln MKZ, Buick Regal, and of course, the Lexus ES. Now, while you can obviously also compare this with the rest of the European compact luxury sedans like the BMW 3 Series, the Mercedes-Benz C300, etc., this is kind of a different vehicle. It's also quite different than the Cadillac ATS or the Lexus IS. Now, up front, the style is exactly what we've come to expect from the modern Acura, and that is elegant and restrained styling. We still have this Acura Shield badge right here on the front grille. Some people also call that the Acura beak. We also have standard LED headlamps right here, which has allowed Acura to make them a little bit narrower than if you had to have a module that also accommodated HIDs or halogen beams. We have very well integrated parking sensors, and you'll also notice one other thing that's very well integrated in this front end, and that's the adaptive cruise control sensor. This does use a radar adaptive cruise control module, but it's very well hidden. It's actually inside the bumper module itself. There's no additional wart hanging off of it, no module on either side of the lower valance. In an unusual twist, the RLX is maintaining fog lamps up front. That's something that's starting to disappear on a wide variety of luxury vehicles, including the Acura MDX, which now does not have a factory option for fog lights. You can get them at the dealer, but they're not standard on that MDX or available as part of any factory option package. Taking a look at the side profile, Acura shortened the overhangs compared to the old TL, and that's the distance between the front of the tire right here and the front of the vehicle. It helps give it a slightly better proportion. Now, of course, the TLX is still a front-wheel drive or an all-wheel drive vehicle. But the drivetrain is not necessarily why I compared it to the competitive set I mentioned earlier. At 190.3 inches long, the TLX is longer than it looks. This is actually longer than the 3 Series, the S60, the A4, the ATS, or that Mercedes-Benz C-Class. This is actually about the same length as the Lexus ES, which, as you may recall, is now based on the Toyota Avalon. This is also about the same length as the Lincoln MKZ and the Buick Regal. Now, part of why the TLX, I think, looks a little bit smaller than it actually is this curve upwards right here on the rear door and the rear glass. That's as opposed to the Lincoln MKZ, which actually just sort of squashes the roof line right back here in the rear. That means we get more headroom in the back in the TLX than we do in the MKZ. Now, even though the MKZ is larger than a number of those rear-wheel drive competitors, it really has less headroom than the Mercedes-Benz C-Class, for instance. Now, right back here, even though the TLX looks like it has a very short trunk lid, we actually have a trunk that's larger than you'll find in your average compact luxury car. Out back, we have hidden exhaust tips right back here, even on the 3.5-liter super handling all-wheel drive model, and we have these slightly smoked tail lamps. These look very attractive, especially on darker paint colors. Overall, the design language of the TLX is sedate, attractive, definitely conservative, more conservative than some of those other entries in this segment. Under the hood of the TLX, we have a very traditional, naturally aspirated 4- and 6-cylinder engine lineup. Things start out with a 2.4-liter 4-cylinder engine, producing 206 horsepower and 182 pound-feet of torque. That engine is mated only to a brand new 8-speed dual-clutch automatic transmission. Now, the interesting thing about that dual-clutch transmission in the RLX is that this is the first dual-clutch transmission, to my knowledge, that also uses a torque converter in addition to the dual clutches. Now, the reason for the torque converter is because a common complaint with dual clutch transmissions, something that I've even noted on my channel, is that starts are a little bit rough. So when you're first engaging first gear off from a stop, things do feel like a manual transmission. That doesn't go on in the TLX because we have that torque converter. Now, the model we're taking a look at here has the optional 3.5-liter V6 engine. This is essentially the same V6 that you'll find under the hood of the MDX and the Acura RLX. In the TLX, it produces 290 horsepower and 267 pound-feet of torque. In addition to using the same variable displacement system that you'll find in other Acura products, helping fuel economy in this model is a standard 9-speed automatic transmission. This is essentially the same ZF 9-speed automatic that you'll find in recent Chrysler and Land Rover products. Now, this 9-speed automatic transmission can also be mated to Acura's super handling all-wheel drive system. Thanks to the two brand new transmissions, fuel economy definitely goes up for the TLX this year. We get 24 miles per gallon city, 35 highway, and 28 combined with that 4-cylinder engine. And if you get the 3.5-liter V6 engine, that drops only slightly to 21 miles per gallon city, 34 highway, and 25 combined. Now, if you opt for the super handling all-wheel drive system, that does take down your highway number to 31, but it leaves the combined number about the same. Now, all models do use a capless filler nozzle, which is really a nice feature. When it comes to front seat comfort, I'll give this 8 out of 10 points. We have a 10-way adjustable power driver seat with a 2-position memory right over there on the door. We have a 2-position adjustable lumbar support for the driver. We also have a tilt telescopic steering column with a decent range of motion. Now Volvo's S60 seats are 1 point higher in my test, even though we do have a manual lumbar support for both the driver and the front passenger. Mercedes-Benz C300 has probably the most comfortable seats in this segment, but you'll definitely pay for them because that Mercedes is a great deal more expensive than this. One thing worth knowing is that the passenger seat in the TLX lacks the adjustable lumbar support that the driver gets. When it comes to rear seat comfort, things go up a notch to 9 out of 10 points, largely because we have a combination of excellent legroom and excellent headroom back here. And that's not something you see in the Lincoln MKZ, for instance. That sexy side profile in the MKZ as well as the Volvo S60 really limit rear headroom. Now, because the price tag of this vehicle is relatively similar to something like a Mercedes-Benz CLA or an Audi A3, the same thing applies there. I wasn't really able to fit an average 6-foot-tall adult in the back of either of those two vehicles very comfortably, but it's definitely possible in this TLX, even though we also have the sunroof. Now, although you will find a little bit more room in the Lexus ES, scooting over here to the right side, this front seat's all the way back in its track, suitable for a 6'5" passenger I had in the vehicle. I still have about ½ inch of legroom right there. Scooting on over to the middle seat, this middle seat is a little bit higher off the ground than these outboard seats, and I do have to cock my head to one side. Not really comfortable for me at 6 feet tall to sit in this middle seat. Rear passengers get a softly padded center armrest with 2 fixed cup holders, and the rear seats do fold almost completely flat, but they fold flat from handles in the trunk, not here in the passenger area. When it comes to cargo capacity, the TLX scores incredibly well because we have a very large trunk right back here. This is definitely larger than you'll find in those rear-wheel drive compact luxury vehicles. I have a 24-inch roller bag right here. You can see that very easily fits upright in that position there. It can also fit this 26-inch roller bag in that position with plenty of additional bag space. In fact, I can actually push this 26-inch roller bag to the back of the trunk, and then I can actually stack 24-inch roller bags right here in front of it. Now, taking these bags out of the trunk, you won't find a spare tire under this cargo area, but you will find a deeper storage well right there where we can actually put 24-inch roller bags in that position and still close the trunk. Thanks to the combination of that under load floor storage area, these well-hidden cargo area hinges, and a helper handle to help you close this trunk lid, we score 9 out of 10 points in my exclusive Trunk Comfort Index. Let's take a quick look around the interior now. We have two-way adjustable headrests for both the driver and the front passenger, and height adjustable seat belts. This tag is removable, by the way. Right over here we have this very unique and I find very attractive Acura seat shape. We have these shoulders right over here. These kind of remind me of the Lady Gaga shoulders in one of her recent music videos. Now, our particular tester has the optional light colored interior. I find this very refreshing when you compare it to a sea of black that you normally find in some of the German competition. If we move right on over here to the door panels, we find mostly soft touch plastics, except for hard touch plastics right there at the bottom of the door. One thing that you won't find, however, is real wood trim in the TLX. This is all imitation wood trim on the doors and the dashboard, even though it is very well done. Now, that imitation wood trim is a very good imitation of wood. It is very attractive, and it's combined with this metallic effect trim and excellent stitching all across the cabin. Moving on over to the dashboard, we have the soft touch injection molded dashboard and soft touch injection molded plastics lower in the dashboard as well. Even in some entry-level luxury cars, you still find hard plastics lower in the dashboard. If we open this glove box, we have a very large compartment right in there, and that divider is removable. I was easily able to accommodate a large tablet computer right there inside. Now, moving on over in the dashboard, the TLX uses the same double binnacle design that we see in the rest of the Acura lineup. This binnacle right here houses the infotainment LCD, and this binnacle right here houses the speedometer and the tachometer. The TLX uses essentially the same two-screen infotainment system that we see in the other Acura products. If you want to know more about this in detail, then go ahead and click that banner at the bottom of your screen for my detailed infotainment review. The basic theme with this system is that we have this large high-resolution 8-inch screen up here, and then we have this touchscreen LCD right down here, along with the control knob below it. Now, the control knob controls this large 8-inch screen up here, and this touchscreen works in coordination with that large screen above. So we have direct access buttons to navigation, phone, info, and audio right down here. And if you want to browse your audio source, you'll be browsing it with this screen right up here, so changing playlists, artists, albums, etc. If you want to change your source, you'll be doing it right here on this screen, although you can also forward and backward through tracks with this touchscreen right here. Touchscreen also serves as our dual zone climate control readout. Now, the first time I laid eyes on this system, I found it a little bit less than intuitive. I may even have called it slightly half-baked, but it actually has grown on me. It's definitely very reliable. The voice commands work very, very well. This is definitely on par with the systems from Lexus as well as Audi and Volvo at the moment. Now, unlike some of those other systems like BMW, Volvo, and Audi, we don't have any online services in this system, so we don't have any data streaming services that are built right into this system. Below that control knob, we have a storage cubby right here that slides open. We have a first tier right here where you can place your smartphone right like that in this little tray, and that hides right there under that door. And then we can also slide this door completely open, and this is where you'll find the USB auxiliary input as well as a 12-volt power port and a deeper storage well. Moving behind that, we have two very large cup holders right over here, and then a very unique shifter for the 3.5 liter model. Now if you do get the 2.4 liter model, we get a more traditional shifter. Moving over to the shifter, let's explain how it works. Right now we're in park, so we have these little red lights that show us we're in park. If we want reverse, we push that button backwards right like that. It'll turn green to show that we're in reverse. If we want neutral, we push this button. Again, red lights show that we're in neutral. If we want drive, we push right here. We get a green circle right there. Now, why do we have a button style arrangement like this rather than a traditional physical shifter? There's some benefits for this. So right now we're in drive. I'm going to go ahead and open the driver's door, and you'll notice that the car automatically shifts into park to keep it from running me over as I get out of the car. Now, the other benefit, putting it right back in drive here, is that if I just want to turn off the car, I just press the start stop button there on the dashboard, and we automatically go into park. It makes it an awful lot more convenient. All you have to do is press one button, and then you get out of your car. You don't have to press park and then turn the car off. Below that, we have our integrated dynamic system. This changes a wide variety of vehicle systems to accommodate driver preference. We have economy, normal, sport, and sport plus. Behind that, we have this brake hold feature. So if I'm in drive and I press the brake hold button and I have my foot on the brake, now the car will actually keep brake pressure on, and I can take my foot off the brake and won't release that pressure until I press on the accelerator pedal. So if you're at a really long stoplight, you don't have to hold your foot on that pedal. Right down here, we have the auto start stop system disable button. Auto start stop is standard on the 3.5 liter V6 model as well, which really makes it a little bit more efficient in the city. Moving behind that, we have this large and very softly padded center armrest. You can really see how softly padded that is right there. If I open that up, we have a fairly deep center console, wallet right down there. Also have a stereo mini auxiliary input and an additional power outlet right there. Moving over to the driver's side, we have essentially the same 4-dial instrument cluster that we get in other Acura products. We have our engine temperature right down here, fuel level right over there on that side, speedometer on the right, tachometer on the left, and in the center we get this full color multi-information display. That multi-information display is controlled by this knob on the steering wheel. It rolls around like that and then clicks to enter as well. We also get this trip button right below that. Zooming in on that multi-information display, you can see we get our transmission mode right there in the center. We can roll around and get a display of what our super handling all-wheel drive system is showing us, average speed, elapsed time, range, all of your typical trip computer information right there. We also have access to certain vehicle settings with the system. We can change our forward collision warning distance from normal to long. You can also alter your forward vehicle detect beep that tells you you're going to hit something. We also have the display unit, whether you want miles or kilometers, road departure mitigation settings. You can choose normal, wide, warning only, etc. This helps keep you on the road if you're planning on leaving the road accidentally. So if you're going to run off the road, this will actually try and steer you back on the road. This is a little bit different than lane departure mitigation because this will also do it to keep you off of soft verges on the roadway. Now the trip button on the steering wheel just cycles through this trip odometer right there at the bottom of the display. Moving out to the steering wheel, we have this 3-spoke steering wheel with sport grips right up here as well. This is that knob that we were taking a look at earlier. We have our cruise control buttons right over here. Enable, disable, set, and resume. Cancel button right down there. This adjusts the following distance in the radar adaptive cruise control, and this is the lane keeping assistant enable and disable button. Right over here we have dedicated phone hang up and pickup buttons. We also have a back button for that infotainment display right over there on the right. Track forward and backward by this toggle knob right there, and then volume is this rotary knob right here. Change the source, and a voice command button right over there. Now on the back of the steering wheel, we have these shift paddles up on this side, down on this side right here. Up on the ceiling, we have our sunglass holder right over here. We also have the buttons for the Acura Link telematics system. This is very much like General Motors OnStar button, general telematics button right over there. If you want the 911 emergency assist style button, that's right here below this fighter jet door, and then you press that button for immediate assistance. That's if you're in an accident or you need an ambulance or something along those lines. And then we have our sunroof controls right over there. Before we go out on the road, we need to talk a little bit about clutches, because clutches are at the heart of why the 2.4 liter and the 3.5 liter versions of the TLX drive differently from one another. Now the 2.4 liter equipped model, as I said earlier, has a dual clutch automatic transmission. What that really means on the inside is that this is really a manual transmission on the inside. The car is doing all the shifting for you, and it uses 2 different clutches. So that means it can shift very quickly, very firmly, and the engagement is always very positive. Now, very interestingly, Acura also inserts a torque converter into that 8-speed dual clutch transmission that helps improve especially low speed starts and slow crawling type maneuvers. So when you're in first gear and you're just crawling along at a very slow speed, this transmission will be an awful lot smoother than anybody else's dual clutch transmission because it has that torque converter. Now the key thing to know about the ZF 9-speed automatic transmission in this 3.5-liter TLX is that it uses a dog clutch, and that's a little bit different than your average automatic transmission out there. Now every other automatic transmission out there uses either friction clutches or bands. They basically operate the same way. We have two surfaces that are mating against one another, they're rubbing. As you apply pressure to the mating point, we start to engage until they're firmly engaged, and then they're all spinning at the same rate. Now the obvious thing with this kind of clutch is you don't have to remove the power in order for this kind of clutch to engage, because you can have one side moving quickly. By the time we firmly engage, they're both moving at the same rate. There's slip allowed, that's how clutches wear, but that's also why that kind of engagement allows you to move. You can think of a manual transmission, and when you're starting off the vehicle, you have to slip the clutch a little bit, then it's firmly engaged and you're moving right along. A dog clutch is not like that. It's also known as a toothed clutch. They're actually teeth. You can think of your fingers spread apart like this, and you actually have to align them, the correct alignment, and then press them together. So that way the teeth are locking, sort of like the church with all the people inside, and then it can actually engage and start rotating. Now there's a very obvious difference when it comes to engagement feel between these two types of clutches. One clutch, obviously, you don't have to reduce power, you just mash them together. Eventually they'll start spinning at the same rate and off you go. A dog clutch, you actually have to stop the power input or the power output basically. You have to get them spinning the right rate, and then you have to jam them together, and then you can accelerate. Now that we're in the car, it's important to talk about where the shifts for this dog clutch actually occur. Gear shifts 1 to 2, 2 to 3, and 3 to 4 don't use a dog clutch. The dog clutch is not involved. It's traditional clutches, so they feel very much like ZF's 8-speed automatic transmission. They're very quick, the engagement is very firm. Now the shift from 4 to 5 uses that dog clutch, so it has to align those teeth, and then it can resume power. The gear shifts from 5 to 6 and 6 to 7 once again happen normally, and the gear shift from 7 to 8 again needs to use a dog clutch, and so again it has that same sort of feel. Delays power a little bit, aligns those teeth, engages them, and then off you go. Now the same thing happens when going downwards through the gears, and that's the important thing to keep in mind with this transmission. So the gear shift from gear 5 to gear 4, or anything below 4 really, so if you're going from gear 5 to gear 2 for instance, it involves that dog clutch. Now this 9-speed is very obvious when you take off like this. We're in those lower gears right here, so these gear shifts from gear 1 to gear 2 feels very normal. It's very firm engagement. And the big difference between this and the 8-speed dual clutch transmission in this same vehicle is if I want to go from gear 5 to gear 2, it's going to take a little bit longer, and it's going to feel, most importantly, a little bit differently. Now the reason for that is in a traditional automatic transmission, even if I'm in gear 5 and I press on the accelerator pedal, the engine doesn't have to reduce power that much to change gears downward. You actually start getting power immediately, and that power tends to increase as you change gears downward. That's not how this transmission feels. So if I floor it right here and then I command gear shifts down, it's going to take a little bit, it's going to engage that gear, it has to fiddle with that dog clutch a little bit, and then off you go. Because of the gear ratios in this transmission, gear 5 is not used in the 0 to 60 or in the quarter-mile time. So as you're accelerating on the freeway, it won't feel any different than any other automatic transmission out there, except that this 9-speed is definitely faster than Acura's old 5 and 6-speed automatics. The difference is really going to be passing acceleration if you're up in those higher gears, or if you're trying to use engine braking to slow you down as you're descending a hill. Because if you're going downhill and you need to shift from gear 5 to gear 4, you won't feel that constant engine braking. You'll actually feel engine braking disappear for a short amount of time as the engine has to disengage everything, try and engage that dog clutch, and then again it can start engine braking down the hill. You'll also notice a little bit of a difference in acceleration times out on the highway. Like right now we're in gear 6. If I were to command gear 2, now all of a sudden that gear is engaged. It took a little bit longer than in the 8-speed dual clutch transmission in this vehicle. Now that you understand why the automatic transmission operates the way that it does, what does this do for us? Well, it actually gives us excellent fuel economy and excellent acceleration. In this 3.5-liter V6 model, we ran from 0 to 60 in 5.4 seconds, which is very, very swift for a naturally aspirated V6 engine. Now, when you compare this with the rest of the competition, for instance, Volvo's turbocharged 3-liter S60 or the turbocharged and supercharged 2-liter S60, both of which actually produce more horsepower and more torque than this engine, and at more advantageous RPMs, if I'm perfectly honest, they're not faster to 60 because we have a very, very low first gear in this car. We also have gears 1 through 4 that are very closely matched with one another. That gives you excellent 0 to 60 acceleration times. Now, acceleration in the 2.4-liter TLX with that 8-speed dual clutch automatic transmission is very good for a vehicle this size with that amount of horsepower. It comes in at 7.2 seconds. I'll give that 6 out of 10 points, where I give the 3.5 liter version 9 out of 10 points. The other reason to use this 9-speed automatic transmission is fuel economy. I've been averaging 25.5 miles per gallon over 560 miles of very mixed driving. Now, while those fuel economy numbers may not sound that impressive on the surface, because Volvo's S60 does advertise higher fuel economy numbers, so does BMW's 3 Series, those higher economy numbers over there are in the two-wheel drive only versions, and this is an all-wheel drive vehicle. And super handling all-wheel drive also includes a torque vectoring rear axle. The 9-speed automatic transmission has 4 overdrive ratios, which means this vehicle gets exceptional fuel economy, especially at higher highway speeds. When you're going 80 miles an hour, this transmission is spinning under 2,000 RPM. It's a very noticeable difference at higher speeds in terms of fuel economy than in the outgoing 6-speed automatic, and essentially the same engine. When it comes to braking, I'll give this 7 out of 10 points. The distances were a little bit longer than I had expected, and braking fade was a little bit higher than I had expected. Still a very solid braking entry, but something along the lines of that BMW 3 Series or the Mercedes-Benz C-Class will definitely brake a little bit faster than this. When it comes to the handling numbers, we have to separate grip from feel, because the TLX doesn't have quite as wide of tires as you'll find on some of the competitors out there, so the grip numbers in terms of skid pad grip results are going to be a little bit lower than some of the competition. But where the TLX really excels is in feel as well as precision. Now, a lot of that is down to the super handling all-wheel drive system that we have in this model right here. Acura super handling all-wheel drive can send more than 50% of the power to the rear axle when it wants to, and it can also shuttle power across the rear wheel from side to side. Now, this is very different than any of the other all-wheel drive systems in this segment, except for those that use torsion center differentials like Audi's Quattro products. So this and the Audi Quattro products are the only ones that can deliberately send more than 50% of the power to a different axle as long as there's no wheel slip. Most of the systems out there in this segment can only lock the inputs for the front and the rear axles together, giving them 50% power front and rear. Now, in addition to that, the TLX gives us a torque vectoring rear axle which can send almost all of that power to a single outside rear wheel whenever it wants to. That means that especially under power going around a corner like this, you get excellent grip, excellent precision, because that outside rear wheel is actually helping push the car around the corner. Now, the downside to the super handling all-wheel drive system is that when combined with this electric power steering, it can make the steering feel a little bit numb. You don't get a whole lot of feedback from those front tires, but the performance is still very good. Now, again, the grip limits are not going to be quite as high as you'll find in some of the competition with wider tires, but it's not bad by any stretch of the imagination. When it comes to cabin noise, the TLX is easily one of the quietest modern Acuras out there, and it's also one of the quietest entries in this segment. That is a little bit of a change for Acura, because in the past, Acura's offerings had been a little bit louder than the average entry, and that's not happening anymore, thanks to a considerable dedication to sound isolation as well as a standard active noise cancellation system. In terms of actual numbers, we ran in at 69 decibels at 50 miles an hour, which is one of the quietest entries in this segment, as I said. Now, you will find a quieter cabin in the Mercedes-Benz C-Class, but this is definitely quieter than any current version of the BMW 3 Series. Now, ride and handling are often two ends of the same stick. If you affect one, you tend to affect the other. So if you want better handling, you tend to have a poorer ride. If you want a better ride, you tend to affect your handling somewhat negatively. Now, to mitigate that as much as possible, Acura fitted the TLX with what they call a 2-mode damper system. This is not a dynamic suspension system. So this is not like the MagnaRide system that you'll find in Audis as well as Cadillac models, and this is not like the dynamic suspension system that you'll find in the Lincoln MKZ. Instead, this is more of a traditional suspension setup, except that Acura fits 2 different valves to the dampers on the vehicle. The 2 different dampers allow the damper to behave differently when encountering large oscillations or small oscillations in motion. So when we're driving along the road like this right here, it feels like a firmer suspension. You can feel some of those road imperfections, get a little bit more feedback from the suspension. However, if I were to drive this over a pothole or a speed bump, that larger valve inside that traditional damper keeps the suspension from bottoming out or feeling overly harsh. Now, the 2 of those combine to give this an 8 out of 10 points when it comes to the ride. This is not as supple as you will find again in those dynamic suspension options or in the air suspension option, which is a brand new entry for this segment. You'll find that in the Mercedes-Benz C-Class. Now, of course, that air suspension in the Mercedes-Benz C-Class does make it feel kind of floaty and kind of boaty, and it really definitely takes a toll on handling. Let's put this TLX in Sport Plus mode, use the paddle shifters, and wrap things up. I know a lot of reviewers out there have commented that the 8-speed dual clutch transmission is their favorite transmission, even though that 2.4-liter engine produces less power than the 3.5-liter V6. Now, that's not my choice. I would actually take this 3.5-liter V6 and the 9-speed automatic transmission over the 8-speed dual clutch transmission. Now, my primary reason for that is the excellent shift nature of this transmission in the 0 to 60 tests and the excellent highway fuel economy numbers, especially if you go over 75 miles an hour or so. So let's talk about pricing for the 2015 TLX. Things start just under $31,000. That's before tax and before destination as well. That's for the base 2.4-liter engine and that 8-speed automatic transmission. If you check all the option boxes, you will end up at $44,700 for the all-wheel drive V6 version that we've been taking a look at right here. Acura likes to keep things pretty easy when it comes to shopping for your car, so everything is really bundled in two separate packages. There's the advanced package and the technology package. The advanced package gives you that radar cruise control with the pre-collision warning system. We also get the electronic tensioning seat belts and the collision mitigating braking system. Now, the combination of the lane departure assistance system, the road departure assistance system, as well as that collision mitigating braking system make this one of the most interactive vehicles when it comes to safety systems, because the collision mitigating braking system operates at all highway speeds. So if you're driving aggressively, the system will engage to try and keep you from hitting that car in front of you. It also jerks those electronic pre-tensioning seat belts back at you to sort of remind you that you're not really driving very nicely and you're ramming up on someone's tailpipe. Compared with the elephant in the room, which is the Lexus ES, the Acura is a whopping $6,600 less. Now, admittedly, the base TLX does have less power, but oddly it has more standard equipment than that base ES. And when you compare the ES to the TLX with a 3.5-liter V6 engine, the Acura is still $2,400 less, but it has even more standard equipment than you'll find in that ES. Now, in addition to those greater standard features, we also have more power under the hood. This handles without a doubt better, and we also get better fuel economy. Also, in addition to all of that, you can get all-wheel drive in the TLX, and you can't in the ES. Lincoln's MKZ is $3,200 more than the TLX, but when you actually adjust for feature content, the MKZ has more standard equipment, so the difference comes down to about $2,000 or so. When you compare the base MKZ to the base TLX, the MKZ is more powerful, and the MKZ also handles better. It also has a bigger trunk, but a smaller back seat. Averaging everything out, however, the Acura and the Lincoln end up relatively similar in terms of value. When it comes to the V6 competition, the pricing is essentially the same Lincoln to the Acura. Now, keep in mind that the Lincoln does not have a torque vectoring rear axle in the all-wheel drive system, and that's really what sets the Acura super handling all-wheel drive system apart. Now, despite that, the Lincoln MKZ handles a little bit better in my tests, but the TLX actually feels better while it's handling. They're very well matched, and they're both very well balanced sedans. Versus the mainstream European entries, the TLX is unquestionably better value. This is about $2,000 less expensive than the BMW 320i or the Cadillac ATS 2.5. While the TLX is definitely a better value than the rear-wheel drive entries in this segment, it's also a very different kind of vehicle. And of course, the ATS and the BMW are more dynamic in terms of handling out on the road, but you get an awful lot more equipment and an awful lot more car in the TLX. Audi's A3 is an awful lot of fun, but it's also an awful lot smaller than the TLX. And when you compare this to the Audi A4, there's a huge price difference between the two. That A4 is more than $4,500 more expensive than the TLX for the front-wheel drive form and more than $8,000 more expensive for the all-wheel drive V6 version. Now, things start getting more competitive when you start comparing the TLX to the Buick Regal. This is only about $900 less than that Buick. The TLX is more powerful in most trims. It also has a V6 engine instead of a turbocharged engine at the top end trim when you're comparing this against the Regal GS. Now, some people may prefer the way a turbo drives, and some people may prefer the way a V6 drives. Regardless of your preference on naturally aspirated or turbocharged engines, the interior in the TLX is definitely a step above that Buick. The Buick is getting a little bit older than the TLX, and this definitely feels fresher on the inside. We also have the super handling all-wheel drive system in this vehicle, which actually can send more power to the rear and direct power across the rear axle, which is not something you can do in the GS. Now, that makes the super handling TLX an awful lot more agile, an awful lot more nimble, and an awful lot more direct out on the road. Volvo's S60 is a strong competitor to the TLX in a variety of ways. Volvo and Acura really compete in the same sort of segment. They're just one tier down from those mainstream luxury competitors like BMW and Mercedes. However, the S60 is notably smaller than the TLX. As I said, the S60 is about the same size as those other European competitors. It just happens to be front-wheel drive biased, very much like the TLX. That means you get an awful lot more car for the dollar in the TLX versus that Volvo. The Volvo will also set you back about $3,000 more across the board. Even though that Volvo is $3,000 more, it doesn't get you any more equipment. We actually have a little bit less equipment, driving the actual price difference between the TLX and the S60 up to more like $4,000. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is that although Volvo does continually poke and prod the S60 to try and keep it fresh, the TLX is a newer and fresher design inside and out. In some compensation for the higher price tag on the S60, we have a bit more standard power, and in Volvo's latest Drive-E series of engines, we also have better fuel economy as well. That means that in general, the comparable S60 model will be faster to 60 and will get better fuel economy if we're talking about the front-wheel drive models. If we're talking about the all-wheel drive models, then things are a little bit different. When When you compare the all-wheel drive flavor of the S60 to the all-wheel drive flavor of the TLX, the difference actually shrinks down to about $2,000 or so. When you're comparing the all-wheel drive models, the Volvo will still be faster, but the Acura will give you better fuel economy. The other thing to keep in mind is that Volvo does not have a torque vectoring rear differential, and we also don't have the ability to send more than 50% of the power to the rear wheels, which is something you can do in the TLX. Now that means while the S60 may handle a little bit better in certain skid pad arrangements, the TLX is going to cut corners faster, especially on very tight winding mountain roads where it can really help steer the vehicle with the rear axle. Now in my mind, the stiffest competition for the TLX is one of my favorite vehicles for the 2014 calendar year, and that would be the Lincoln MKZ Hybrid. It's similar in power to the base TLX, however we get excellent fuel economy, you still get excellent handling because that Lincoln has really wide tires even on the hybrid model. Now of course that Lincoln MKZ is more expensive than this, and the feature content is a little bit lower depending on how you look at what's on the base TLX. However, you'll actually pay off that difference in about 5 to 6 years based on the fuel economy. That means that my pick for this segment is still the Lincoln MKZ Hybrid. If, however, you're looking for something that's not a hybrid or you're looking for a bit more power, then definitely put the TLX on your shopping list. This is one of the best and most impressive sedans in this category. Now, especially if you're looking at the Buick Regal or the Lexus ES, you should put the TLX on your list. This is an awful lot more dynamic, and I think it's also an awful lot nicer on the inside than that Lexus ES, and it's considerably less expensive. Thanks for taking the time to watch this video. Again, I'm Alex Dykes, and this has been the 2015 Acura TLX. Go ahead and click that subscribe banner at the bottom of your screen so you can be updated on all of my latest videos, and I'll see you next week.